So welcome to our first live session on Mexico business culture. First of all, thank you very much for your participation. We are very happy to have you with us. And if you have any question, please use the chat box. We'll try to answer to all your questions. My name is Antoine Fougère. I am the director of Global Business Culture. Our company offers culture awareness training to multinationals all over the world. And to start, to be honest with you, there are so many issues that we could cover on Mexico business culture, but we decided to select three very important points. The first one is how to develop relationship with Mexicans. This is absolutely critical to be successful in Mexico. The second point that we're going to cover is around language, and that's another point, how to use Spanish in Mexico. And the third point is decision-making process, which is very, very specific in Mexico. And today, we have the pleasure to have two real experts on Mexico business culture. So, Luis and Carlo, thank you very much to be with us. And could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Please be my guest, please.
Sure. My name is Luis Gonzalez, senior consultant with Global Business Culture, based here in Mexico City. I'm a Mexican resident, but I was born and raised in the United States in Los Angeles, California. And of course, as a Mexican American, have been part of Mexican culture for all of my life, and now living and working here. So it's really a pleasure to be here to discuss these topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Well, my name is Carlos Ponce, and I currently reside in the beautiful city of Cuernavaca in Mexico, about 45 minutes south of Mexico City, where Luis is located. I have a major in communication sciences, and I've been in sales and marketing and communications in different sectors and verticals. Most of them in training and technology. And I was I really look forward to this conversation and just create some fine synergies around what global business culture is doing across the world. Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Antoine, for having me here today.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Luis. So, Luis, let's start with how to build relationship in Mexico. Could you please share your experience with us?
Sure. I think that's, for me, that's almost first and foremost, as you said in the opening. There's so many things that we could be talking about, and in our short amount of time, we've chosen those three topics. I would say relationships, building and nurturing relationships is probably top on my list when anyone asks me what would be important to know to have successful business ventures in Mexico. Relationships in Mexico are fundamental. Unlike a lot of transactional cultures like the United States, where I was born and raised, business in Mexico is deeply rooted in personal connections and trust. So it is super important. It's essential to understand and recognize just how important relationships are to business success here in Mexico. So for Americans and for other foreigners outside of Mexico, this often means just taking a step back from diving straight into business all the time, and instead investing a little bit of time and effort into getting to know your Mexican counterparts on a deeper level, more than a surface level. There's a cultural expectation that genuine personal connections will lay the foundation or lay the groundwork for trust, and that trust is what makes business successful here in Mexico. So here in Mexico, many people are aware that in Mexico, we have a collectivist culture that values loyalty and strong social bonds. That is a big value here in Mexico. Family, close acquaintances play a big role both in personal and professional life. And people tend to, not always, but tend to in Mexico, people tend to prefer doing business with people they already know, or people they trust, or someone that they trust and know has referred them to, if that makes any sense, right? So super important. Now, one thing I want to mention also is that formality also matters in terms of building relationships in Mexico. Formality is still kind of a big deal here in terms of using titles when appropriate. If someone's title is doctor, if someone's title is licenciado, using those titles, especially when you first get to know your Mexican counterparts, will go a long way in building that trust and establishing that relationship. So how do we go about building those relationships in order to be successful with business in Mexico? My first recommendation is start with small talk. Show genuine interest. And I say genuine because I don't mean just the small talk of like, well, how's the weather? And we all know that it's disingenuous. But be genuinely interested, not just in the business, but the people you're trying to do business with, and show general interest in the way that they do things in the Mexican culture. Be consistent, be reliable, and follow through on what you say you're going to do, because your word here in Mexico carries weight. And building these strong relationships that are necessary for the success of the business takes time. It could take time. So my number one recommendation is, in terms of building these relationships, is start with small talk, show genuine interest in the other people on a personal level, in your Mexican counterparts on a personal level, and avoid being rushed. Avoid rushing, pushing or rushing for a quick deal or to sign the contract or to get it done. Another thing is the idea of reciprocity. What I mean by that is there's a strong cultural value in Mexico that, how we say in the United States, we have an expression, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. We have a similar expression in Spanish. It's hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Today for you, tomorrow for me. I see Carlos agreeing, shaking his head. Yep. So that's just how things work here in Mexico. And I'll also mention just small, thoughtful gestures, like if you do come to Mexico to actually have feet on the ground and do business here with your Mexican counterparts, accepting an invitation to dinner or to lunch will go a long way in building goodwill. So strong relationships in Mexico are not only about trust, it's also about access. Okay, so relationships, when you develop these strong relationships with your stakeholders here in Mexico, clients, partners here in Mexico, it provides, it opens doors to opportunities. These strong relationships that you build through the small talk, etc., will open doors to other opportunities and can even help resolve conflicts more smoothly when they arise. So it's important to navigate the cultural nuances. Communication tends to be a little more indirect than in the United States. So show respect by maybe softening your approach. If the answer is a hard no, like in the United States, we would tend to say no if the answer is no. Soften the message delivery a little bit here in Mexico so that your messages are received well. And be prepared, as I mentioned already, be prepared to engage in some meaningful small talk to deepen the relationship. Don't rush into the business conversations, especially at social meals like lunch or dinner, because I'll tell you what, here in Mexico, if you're invited to lunch or dinner in a business context, these gatherings are not just your typical hour lunch like what we would have in the United States. They can last for 2 to 4 hours, maybe longer, and they include drinks. And sometimes the business is not discussed at all, or maybe isn't discussed in detail. And that's okay, because the relationship building is happening at the table during these meals. And that is important. Often that's more important than the deal itself, right? A quick story to highlight this. Years ago, I worked for an organization that was an Indian organization. They had a headquarters in the US and they had a big office in Mexico. We had clients from the United States come to Mexico to the office to talk business for 3 or 4 days. On the first day that they got here, these American business people, they were businessmen, there were about 4 of them. They were ready to get down to business, but they were invited to lunch. And I remember hearing them talking amongst themselves. After lunch, we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and we'll do this. They had a whole agenda. That agenda did not happen because that lunch lasted 4 hours with course after course after course and toasts of tequila, even music. They had invited some mariachis to come in and entertain these American clients, and I could see the Americans after a bit squirming in their seats. And I remember leaning over to one of them and I told them, just flow with it, get into it, relax, and be grateful and enjoy the meal. We'll get to the business when we get to it, maybe at 5 p.m., maybe not. So I've also seen scenarios where Americans give the feeling of being rushed to close the deal, which causes apprehension or some mistrust on the part of the Mexican counterparts, and the deal's lost because the Americans didn't give the impression that they were interested in the long-term relationship. So relationships are key. Relationships are fundamental to doing business successfully in Mexico. I'm wondering, Carlos, if you have any thoughts or experiences on that.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, it's been an interesting ride because I've kind of seen these circumstances on both sides of the border, not just here in Mexico, but also while being in the U.S., because I've been lucky enough to have that chance of also working in the U.S. on different occasions. And but in the case of people, those who want to come to Mexico and conduct business successfully and develop meaningful, fulfilling, fruitful relationships with their counterparts, the way I see it, Luis, is about, I think, or my recommendation, if I may say so, right, would be to, even before purchasing a plane ticket and fly over to Mexico to meet with someone or with a partner, with a counterpart, with a team, would be to just what I would call freely or loosely some mental preparation or awareness of what is it that they are going to encounter. I mean, just keep their minds open, because what I've seen is that I've seen business people from the U.S. come to Mexico, but there's this bias about there's some expectations that are unrealistic, that they're going to come here and they're going to find a setting, a culture, an atmosphere that is going to be equal to that in the U.S., and that is absolutely not true. That is totally, it is different. So it's beneficial for the business endeavor, for people wanting to come here, to get ready. Just be aware that you're going to come here and you might find people that may speak English or may be considerate enough and try to speak English to you out of consideration, but don't expect everybody to speak the language fluently, at least, right? So usually Mexicans are accommodating in a way that, yes, they try to, be helpful and communicate and make the other person feel comfortable. But what I've seen also is that once that person leaves and the team in Mexico remains, talking about the experience, it's like, it would be so much easier if if we could communicate better. If the person has an interest in knowing more about our culture, is appreciated. Because so there's also this sense of appreciation. I use the other sense. The other day we were talking, you and I mentioned an example. It's like if I go to China or if I go to France, and I expect everyone to speak my language, I'm not gonna be, I might be in for a surprise. It's like I gotta do my homework if I gotta be successful in another country. Okay, and all right, so that's a little bit of what I can tell you, Luis.
Thank you.
Now back to you.
So Carlos, thank you very much, Carlos. It's interesting because my experience in Brazil is very similar. Where in Brazil, typically at work, you start the day talking about the last football match. So if you want to belong, you really need to follow up on what are the last news as far as the big teams are concerned. And that's a very big deal in Brazil. So I think it's very similar in many countries in Latin America. Time is flying, guys. We need to move to another very important key point to be successful in Mexico, which is language awareness and documentation. So, Carlos, please tell us what is your view on that.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for asking. I think that's a great question, and I'm going to start by mentioning an example, an actual example of something that I experienced. Right. So there might be companies in the U.S. or in other countries, but mainly in the U.S., which has been my experience, that want to come to Mexico or want to conduct business in Mexico. They want to have clients in Mexico or partners in Mexico, but little attention is placed onto the aspect of the legalities of the situation, the documentation that is needed. For example, if there is a company in the U.S. who is pursuing clients or big clients in Mexico, like corporations or entities in Mexico that are doing business in Mexico, but sometimes the fact that yes, it is an international company, but those working here are Mexicans, right? So so sometimes even the documentation is legally required to be in Spanish, right? By the authorities, by the tax authorities or some other authorities. What I've seen is that the companies want to do business, but they miss that part of they don't like no attention is placed into doing what needs to be done in order to have at least both languages, right, on the documentation, so that I'm not an expert in the matter because I'm not a lawyer or an attorney by no means, but from what I've seen, it would be beneficial those wanting to come here to conduct business in Mexico at least talk to an attorney in Mexico, right? Or in both countries at the same time, and just get some information on how to go about the documents, because some companies here require that the documents are in Spanish, and some companies are not prepared to take that step, right? They're just not prepared. They're just like, okay, well, here's our contract, and then the receiving party in Mexico is going to say, yeah, but this is I mean, I can understand some of it, but I need to understand it in Spanish. So what do? It's not a catch-22 situation. It's just a matter of talking to an attorney, having proper how can I say this, support or information prior to conducting business, prior to attempting to conduct business, because that's going to be needed, right? And again, and we go back to the appreciation part. It's like Mexican companies are going to say, yeah, these guys are ready. These guys mean business because they're ready. They're prepared, right? So I think it is important.
Yeah,
so
good point.
To do with the legalities, documentation, just think before you come, hey, how we're going to do this? Because we're doing this internationally, right? And there might even be an opportunity for the American or the foreign company to take steps towards establishing a legal entity in Mexico, right? So that all the invoicing across, there's, again, I'm not an expert, but there could be some tax considerations or benefits that come in play. I don't know. I'm just thinking, but yeah, that's what I can say. It's just think before you come that could be a possibility. There could be the need to check in with an attorney and take care of the legalities in both languages so that both parties are protected and feel confident about conducting business with each other.
Hey, I have some thoughts, Antoine, if I can just add
Sure.
some thoughts to that.
Go ahead.
I've seen the opposite kind of what you just described happen, where I've worked with, the American vendor or client working with the Mexican counterpart, and all along the conversations with the Mexican team, the Mexican stakeholders, and the U.S. American stakeholders, all the conversations have been in English. All the meetings, all the conversations leading up to the point of now we're ready to sign papers has all been in English And then the paperwork, the legalities, the contracts, the agreements, all these things come from a different department in Mexico. And all of that documentation is in Spanish. And then the US American side receives all this documentation in Spanish, and they don't know what to do with it because they probably can't even read and understand some of it. And the Mexican team members, I have seen the people that are sending out these documentations are saying the onus is not on us. This is Mexico. You're wanting to do business in Mexico. Our paperwork and our whole legal structure, everything is in Spanish. And so the onus is on the foreigner doing business in Mexico, as you said, to be ready, perhaps with legal help, perhaps not, but be ready, at least with a translator, to help you with any paperwork that may be coming through in Spanish. And good point is Carlos' message. It shows good intention on your part when you're ready and you have documentation or any kind of paperwork, if you will, to send to the Mexican counterpoints, and it's already in Spanish. That goes a long way in building the relationship, which I just talked about.
And if I may, I just like, I would like
just a second. Sorry to interrupt. We have a question from one of our participants.
Cool.
Thanks, Kenneth. And I'm going to read you the question. Do you think it is a lack of understanding on the part of the US companies, an expectation that the Mexican companies will just learn English, or a lack of resources on the US part? That's the question.
I got a thought on that. Carlos, do you have a thought on that?
I think I do. Do you want to go give it a shot first?
I'll go first, and I have no data to back this up. It's just from my experience, and I am a U.S.-born American. I think a lot of time it's the expectation on the part of the Americans that the Mexican companies are just going to learn English, or they just already speak it anyway, right? I mean, it's right next door to the U.S. Don't they already know English? I think most of the time, and Kenneth, I see your chat, Kenneth, thank you for the question. I think most of the time, from my experience, it's the expectation on the part of the U.S. Americans in particular, maybe other foreigners, that the Mexicans will just acquiesce, or they already know English. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of along the same lines. It's because from what I experienced is like, I was once, I received an invitation for a presentation. It was to say like a sales pitch. And I decided to attend it because the product seemed interesting. But the person knew that I was in Mexico, right? So, and he showed up to the meeting, and he just starts talking in English, right? Luckily, I speak the language. I'm Mexican. My native language is Spanish. I managed to learn the language at an early age. So I took the time, right? And that's why we can communicate. But this person assumed that I spoke the language. And what if I didn't? Right? So that might have come as a surprise. And the other thing that I've noticed, also I have the experience, Luis, is once, again, I was, working with a client. I'm not going to mention any names or anything, but I was working with a client. Again, they were trying to pursue clients in Mexico, and when the opportunity generated, right, there was a prospect interested in the service, and then I finally managed to set up a meeting with the account executive from the company so that they could, give continuity and pursue the closing of the deal, but the account executive did not speak a word of Spanish. And the client in Mexico, well, her English was not that good. So what do we do?
Seen it.
Right?
Yeah.
So I had to play and improvise the role of interpreter, right?
Yeah.
Just to make it viable. So I think there's an opportunity there. So if there are companies in Mexico that want to do business in Norway, well, I might as well learn Norwegian, right? At least the bare minimum to conduct business, right?
Yeah.
That's my intent. So I think other countries could benefit from that mindset. It's like, I'm going to do business in Mexico. I have at least to have one person in staff that can manage the language. That would be my recommendation to avoid, mishaps or misunderstandings or or
Sure.
So, Carlos and Luis, I completely agree that language is a big issue, and it's absolutely critical to show that either you speak their language or you're trying to speak to show respect. Let's move to the last point, decision-making process, which is also sometimes difficult to understand in Mexico. Luis, what are your view and recommendation on this?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's just, in our last 5 minutes that we have, let's touch on this idea of the importance of being flexible when doing business in Mexico, especially when it comes to making decisions or the decision-making process. One of the key cultural differences to be aware of is decision-making in Mexico tends to be more centralized and hierarchical than in many other cultures, like in the US. Final approvals often come from higher ups, from senior executives, even if it seems like from your perspective, you've got alignment at the lower levels. And this could lead to delays or confusion if you're not expecting, if you're not ready for it. Now, in some cases, and I want to just say this right now, I am not painting a wide brush. This is not everyone all the time. This is most of the people, most of the time. That's how culture works. Now, in some cases, Mexican colleagues may not explicitly say they need to check with their higher ups, with their bosses, their leaders before moving forward. They're not being evasive. It's simply how respect for hierarchy just plays out in Mexican life. And hierarchy is deeply rooted. It's a deeply rooted value in Mexican society, not just the workplace. You will experience that walking around with people giving deference to you if you're dressed a certain way or you have a certain title, etc. So how do we adapt? Be flexible. Flexibility is key. Be patient. Be persistent. Try to avoid pushing for quick decisions. I said that earlier. The timeline might be slower than what you're used to, but that doesn't mean things are not progressing or moving forward. It's just the process is different. I talked earlier about building relationships. Do it at all levels because strong relationships matter, and investing time in getting to know the stakeholders, the higher ups even, can really help things move forward when the time is right. Respect that hierarchy, address the right person at the right level with the right tone, use titles. As I say, titles matter. Here in Mexico, showing respect goes a long way. Be flexible. I said that already. I'm going to say it again. Be flexible with your expectations. Sometimes we just need to step away from the rigid procedures or tight timelines that we're used to if they don't align, if that doesn't align with the way things are done locally here in Mexico. Now, I'm not saying lower your standards. What I'm saying is be adaptable, be flexible, take the long-term view. Now, while the decision-making process might feel slow sometimes, it often leads to more thoughtful, sustainable outcomes, and definitely will build a stronger relationship over time. So in short, be flexible. We have an expression in Mexico. Some people are aware of it. Some people hate to hear it. Mañana. Mañana may not necessarily mean 24 hours from now. Am I right, Carlos?
Right.
Expression. Mañana might mean don't hold your breath. It might mean later on. It might mean next week. So be flexible and try to understand that indirect style of communication. It may take a little longer to get the decision made, but when it is made, it's going to set a solid foundation for your long-term success in Mexico. So those are my thoughts on that topic, Antoine. Thank you. I don't know if Carlos, if you have any final thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, other than agreeing with you, and the only thing that I would dare to add, Luis, is that for those wanting to come into Mexico or thinking of doing business here, in contrast to U.S. culture or corporate culture, there's a tendency in the U.S. for companies to be a little bit more. There's a trend that the companies are a little bit more horizontal in terms of hierarchy.
Yep.
Especially in technology, right? So you have companies like Google, and then you have these new concepts of self-managed organizations or flat organizations, non-hierarchical, etc. Here in Mexico, these are fairly new concepts. So structures are more vertical. So you please, I would recommend highly, expect that. Be ready for that. Be ready to have a vertical structure. Even if the person that you're talking to might be able to make a decision, it doesn't mean that he or she is going to make a decision right there and then, because there's some ideas about, oh no, I got to talk to the powers that be, and then let me get back to you, right? And I'll get back to you. Because why? Because it's subconsciously it's like I have the power of the decision-making process, but I'm not going to tell you. I might have it, but I'm not going to tell you. So I'm going to, right? And then just be aware of that. Just little nuances between corporate cultures in the U.S. and Mexico, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just happens. That's just the way it is. It's a work in progress. We're making progress in terms of corporate culture, but it is different than that in the U.S. and other countries.
So, Carlos and Luis, thank you very much for your insight.
Is that all? That's it? Time's out?
Yeah.
We're just getting started here.
We're just getting started, man.
Exactly. I think that most of us would like to spend like 2 hours more with you guys to learn about Mexico as a society and as a business opportunity. Unfortunately, we're already at the end of our live session. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for your participation. Definitely, if you are doing business in Mexico, please contact us. We would be more than happy to help you. We also invite you to follow our company LinkedIn page, where you could get even more information on Mexico and Mexican business culture. And we look forward to meet you again in our next live.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, everybody.
See you next time. Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey.